The Chernobyl Disaster, 1986, this remains the most catastrophic nuclear accident in history. On April 26, 1986, Reactor 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear plant in Ukraine underwent a botched safety test. Operators wanted to see if the steam turbines could power cooling pumps during a blackout, but to conduct the experiment, they manually disabled all automatic emergency shutdown systems. This left the reactor in a highly unstable state. When power surged unexpectedly, they attempted an emergency shutdown by pressing the AZ5 button to insert control rods. However, a fatal design flaw meant the tips of these rods were made of graphite, which actually accelerated the nuclear reaction for a split second before stopping it. This caused a massive steam explosion that blew the 2,000-ton steel lid off the reactor and started a graphite fire that lasted 10 days. The plume released 400 times more radiation than the Hiroshima bomb, spreading across Europe. While 28 workers died immediately from acute radiation syndrome, thousands later died from radiation-induced cancers. The surrounding 30-kilometer exclusion zone is still uninhabitable today, and the financial cost exceeded $700 billion. It stands as a grim reminder of how design flaws and human error can turn a power source into a weapon. The sinking of the Titanic, 1912, billed as unsinkable, the Titanic was the pinnacle of Edwardian engineering. However, its sinking on April 14, 1912, was a chain of human arrogance and systemic failures. The ship featured 16 watertight compartments, but the watertight bulkheads did not reach all the way to the ceiling of the decks. The iceberg scrape opened a gash along 5 compartments. The ship was only designed to stay afloat with 4 flooded. As the bow dipped, water spilled over the top of the bulkheads into the next compartment like an overflowing ice cube tray, pulling the ship deeper until it snapped in two. The tragedy was worsened by outdated safety laws. The Titanic carried only 20 lifeboats, enough for just 1,200 people, despite having over 2,200 on board. Furthermore, the lookouts lacked binoculars, and the unusually calm sea meant there was no white surf breaking against the iceberg to make it visible. 1,500 people perished in the -2 degrees Celsius water. The aftermath led to the first global SOLAS, Safety of Life at Sea, treaty, which mandated lifeboats for every soul on board and 24-hour radio monitoring. It remains the most famous maritime disaster, proving that no machine is beyond the laws of physics. The Bhopal Gas Leak, 1984. This is the world's deadliest industrial disaster. On the night of December 2, 1984, 40 tons of methyl isocyanate, MIC, gas leaked from a Union Carbide pesticide plant in Bhopal, India. The disaster was rooted in corporate negligence and extreme cost-cutting. To save money, the plant's critical safety systems, including refrigeration units to keep the MIC stable, gas scrubbers to neutralize leaks, and flare towers to burn off escaping gas, were either shut down or in total disrepair. During routine pipe maintenance, water entered storage tank 610, triggering a runaway exothermic reaction. The pressure burst the safety valve, releasing a massive cloud of toxic gas into the night air. Since MIC is denser than air, it did not dissipate. It drifted through the surrounding slums at ground level. Sleeping residents woke up choking as the gas burned their eyes and melted their lungs. While the government recorded 3,500+ deaths, independent estimates suggest up to 20,000 people died. Today, over 500,000 survivors suffer from chronic blindness and respiratory failure. The site has never been fully cleaned, and the toxic waste continues to poison the local groundwater for new generations. The Beirut Port Explosion, 2020. On August 4, 2020, the city of Beirut, Lebanon, was devastated by one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in history. The cause was 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate that had been stored in a port warehouse without any safety measures for 6 years. Ammonium nitrate is a stable chemical used in fertilizer, but it becomes a high-order explosive when exposed to extreme heat and pressure, despite multiple warnings from customs officials over the years that the stockpile was a ticking time bomb. Government corruption and negligence ensured the chemicals remained in the heart of the city. A fire broke out in a nearby fireworks warehouse, which eventually reached the ammonium nitrate. The resulting detonation produced a supersonic blast wave that leveled the port and pulverized buildings for miles. The explosion was so powerful it was heard 240 kilometers away in Cyprus and registered as a 3.3 magnitude earthquake. It killed 218 people, injured 7,000, and left 300,000 homeless in a single second. Property damage was estimated at $15 billion, crippling an already struggling economy. It is a modern example of how administrative failure can result in a disaster of military-scale proportions. Deepwater Horizon oil spill, 2010. The Deepwater Horizon was a state-of-the-art offshore drilling rig in the Gulf of Mexico. In April 2010, while finishing a well 5,000 feet below the surface, a surge of high-pressure methane gas shot up the drill pipe. A critical emergency device on the seafloor called a blowout preventer, BOP, was designed to cut the pipe and seal the well in such an event. However, the pipe had buckled under the pressure, preventing the BOP's giant shears from closing completely. The gas reached the rig and ignited, causing a massive explosion that killed 11 workers. 2 days later, the rig sank, leaving the well wide open on the ocean floor. For 87 consecutive days, an estimated 210 million gallons of raw crude oil spewed into the Gulf, visible from space. It devastated over 1,000 miles of coastline, killed millions of marine animals, and decimated the local fishing and tourism industries. The total cost for the company, BP, in cleanup, fines, and settlements exceeded $65 billion. It remains the largest accidental marine oil spill in history, highlighting the extreme risks of deep-sea drilling and the catastrophic consequences of mechanical failure at such depths. Tenerife Airport Disaster, 1977. The deadliest accident in aviation history occurred on the ground, not in the air. On March 27, 1977, two Boeing 747 seconds, one operated by KLM and the other by Pan Am, collided on a fog-covered runway in the Canary Islands. The disaster was the result of a perfect storm of errors. A terrorist bombing at a nearby airport had forced dozens of planes to divert to the small Tenerife airport, causing extreme congestion. A thick fog then rolled in, reducing visibility to zero and leaving the control tower without ground radar. Due to a misunderstanding of radio instructions and radio interference, simultaneous transmission, the KLM pilot believed he had been granted takeoff clearance. He began his takeoff roll while the Pan Am plane was still taxiing on the same runway, hidden by the fog. By the time they saw each other, it was too late to stop. 583 people died in the collision and resulting inferno. This tragedy led to the global standardization of aviation English and standard phrases to ensure that communication errors would never cause such a catastrophe again. It also led to cockpit resource management, encouraging junior crew members to challenge captains if they suspect an error. The Banqiao Dam failure, 1975. This is the deadliest structural failure in history, occurring in China's Henan province. The Banqiao Dam was built to survive a once-in-a-thousand-year flood, but in August 1975, Typhoon Nina dropped a whole year's worth of rain in just 24 hours. The dam's sluice gates, meant to release excess water, were partially blocked by sediment and could not be opened fast enough. As the reservoir overflowed, the dam disintegrated. This triggered a terrifying domino effect. As the massive wall of water rushed downstream, it caused 62 other smaller dams to collapse one by one. A 20-foot-high wave, nearly 10 miles wide, swept across the plains at 50 kilometers per hour, wiping out entire cities in minutes. While 26,000 people died in the initial flood, the secondary disasters, famine, and disease pushed the total death toll to a staggering 171,000 to 230,000 people. The Chinese government kept the details of the disaster secret for decades, but it remains the most lethal example of engineering failure and the catastrophic potential of dam mismanagement. It serves as a stark reminder that even our strongest structures have limits when faced with extreme weather. The Great Smog of London, 1952. In December 1952, a period of severe air pollution covered London for 5 days, resulting in a mass casualty event. A weather phenomenon called an anticyclone trapped a layer of cold air and coal smoke near the ground, known as a temperature inversion. Because it was an unusually cold winter, Londoners were burning massive amounts of low-grade sulfurous coal for warmth. The smoke from millions of chimneys, combined with factory emissions and diesel bus exhaust, had nowhere to escape. The smog became so thick that visibility dropped to zero. People could not see their own feet while walking. Public transport ground to a halt, and even indoor events were canceled as the smog penetrated buildings. The high concentration of sulfur dioxide caused severe respiratory failure and cardiac distress. An estimated 12,000 people died, and 100,000 were made permanently ill. This disaster was the primary catalyst for the modern environmental movement, forcing the UK Parliament to pass the Clean Air Act of 1956. It was the first time in history that a government was forced to recognize that industrial air pollution was a direct and immediate threat to human life. The Piper Alpha Disaster, 1988. The Piper Alpha was once the most productive oil rig in the North Sea, but it was destroyed by a series of explosions on July 6, 1988. The disaster was caused by a simple communication error during a shift change. A safety valve had been removed from a backup gas pump for routine maintenance, but the paperwork informing the next shift was never seen. When the primary pump failed, the night crew started the backup pump, unaware that the line was unsealed. Gas leaked from the missing valve and ignited instantly. The initial blast severed the rig's main gas lines. Because Piper Alpha was connected to other platforms, those rigs continued to pump high-pressure gas into the fire, fueling an inferno that reached 700 degrees Celsius. The heat was so intense it melted the rig's massive steel legs, causing the entire 14,000-ton structure to collapse into the sea. Out of the 226 people on board, 167 died, Many were forced to jump from 175-foot heights into the freezing, oil-covered water. This disaster led to a total overhaul of offshore safety regulations, making it mandatory for rigs to have blast-proof walls and automated shutdown systems. The Aral Sea collapse, 1960s present. This is one of the worst environmental disasters in history, the near-total disappearance of the fourth-largest lake in the world. In the 1960s, Soviet engineers decided to turn the surrounding Central Asian desert into massive cotton plantations. To irrigate the thirsty crops, they diverted the two main rivers, the Amu Darya and Sir Darya, that fed the Aral Sea. They prioritized industrial cotton output over ecological survival, fully aware that the sea would eventually dry up. The result was a total ecological collapse. The sea shrank by 90%, split into smaller pieces, and left behind a vast, salty desert littered with rusted shipwrecks. As the water evaporated, it left behind layers of toxic pesticides and fertilizers that had washed in from the cotton fields over decades. Today, massive windstorms pick up this toxic dust and carry it for hundreds of miles, causing high rates of cancer, throat diseases, and respiratory failure in millions of local residents. It is a haunting example of ecocide, where deliberate human planning successfully killed an entire sea and destroyed the livelihoods of everyone who lived on its shores.